And his answer was he thought they were evil.
I think there's two sides to this. For me, my experiences have actually been a little bit spiritual, actually, and they didn't really hurt me except for almost electrocute me a couple of times during an abduction, and they scared me. Yeah, I was afraid. Yeah, I was really afraid. And part of my background is I was a combat soldier, so I guess I know how to time myself in fear. And I was a platoon sergeant, so I was kind of in charge, and I know how to, I guess, relate to fear, and a little bit. But there's been times I jumped up out of that bed, I walked around the house, and I was scared to death. I had to call a couple of my colleagues just to calm down and tell them what I saw and what I felt. It does get a little scary, but from what I've seen in my experiences, the 5 UFOs I've seen, they were tailing me, and they were, I guess, tracking me down. The first abduction, I knew was an hour and a half somewhere, and I had a regression about that abduction. Like I was sitting on a table and trying to put on a smaller shirt, and I was a pudgy guy, and my buddy was kind of thin, so I was trying to put on his shirt on this table, and I remember that. Just a slight glimpse is all they give me. And they let me know that they were kind of extracting how I was being educated, like the kind of books I was reading. Because I have these kids' books in my mind with a horseshoe in the back and all these little animals around this horseshoe. You might have remembered those books.
Oh, yeah, I do.
But that flashed in my mind. And then the movies that I saw that flashed in my mind, and Five Gates to Hell was one of them. And why they extracted those, I guess those were the things that I was emotionally charged with, and I guess that's in my brain, and they extracted that. So those are things that I kind of have an idea that they were looking for. They were finding out how we were being educated, and they do this all the time. They know how we're educated. They just test certain sample, random, I guess, people. It could be that I could be Crow Indian a little bit, about 15%. My mom's about 25% Crow Indian, and they track Indian, Native American Indian, and for some reason they had something to do with them several hundred years ago. So that could be part of the DNA process that they're tracking.
Well, too, and I can't remember if you were implanted or not, but, like Timothy Collins been on my show. I've had actually another person, that claims they were implanted. And I don't know if they're doing that to keep track of you or what your emotions are or your health or, it's just interesting that they are taking people.
I was implanted twice that I know of. The 2 months after the first UFO sighting when I was 14 years of age, I went to college for journalism, so I take really good notes and I take pictures. I try to take pictures, but a lot of these events that happen, you can't take pictures. But what I noticed, well, the first time that I know I was abducted after I found this little thing in my left testicle. And I was kind of feeling around and I felt it, and I was able to look down, and there's a little hole, just a red scar, just only about 3/8 of an inch long. And I felt this little, it felt like a little, I guess, M&M, a small M&M.
Uh-huh.
It was in my scrotum, and I eventually worked it out back out of that hole. It opened up, and I got it out, and it was kind of a white, ashy color. It was like shaped like an Advil or a small M&M. And as I had it out in my hand, it started turning brown, a light brown. And I showed my mom, and she says, "Throw that thing away." She said, "That's probably a blackhead that ingrown." I said, "No, Mom." I said, "There was a hole cut there for it." I was 14 years old, but I was smart enough to realize there was a hole cut there for that thing. So how could that be?
Well, too, I hate to say it, a blackhead or, a boil or anything like that isn't, when you remove it, it doesn't turn black right away. It takes a lot of time before it starts changing color. And I know from talking and reading about implants, when they're removed, a lot of times they do change color. depending on, what type of implant, I guess it is.
Right. I had one in my leg some years later. This was in 2011. I guess I'm going to jump around here, but we're talking about implants. I had one in my leg that had a little round red hole in my left calf. I looked down, and I was scratching it, and it was itching. And I scratched it, I guess, a little too hard, and up popped a bubble of blood. Okay, so I got a napkin, and I dabbed it. And when I did, I pulled out a hunk. It looked like a little charcoal piece, kind of a weird-shaped piece of, I don't know what it was. I got it out, and I said, oh, wow. And since I've had so many UFO experiences, I knew exactly what it was. It was an implant. And I didn't see pictures on the web of these things. I think Daryl Sims has a lot of pictures of them. And I got this thing out, and I kept it, and I put it in a little plastic bag to keep the air off of it, because I knew from 14 years of age that these things disintegrate in the air. And so I was learning, even at a young age, what this UFO, what they do and how they operate a little bit. So I took that. I took a lot of pictures of it. I still got a lot of pictures of it, but the closest one I got when I first got it, I took it to a little UFO meeting up in Springfield, Illinois, and I had a little microscope. It was kind of a junior microscope, you can call it. I put this thing underneath that microscope, and it looked like brain neurons coming off of it. And there was a biologist there, and she was an older lady, and she was my friend, and we researched together. And she looked at that thing. She said, I've worked at St. Louis University as a biologist. She said, I've never seen anything like that. It was like brain neurons. And I thought, wow, they look like little spiders, but they more resembled brain neurons. Getting back to your question, they probably do get into your DNA, and they hook to your DNA, and they change you somewhat, or they put a tag on you, and they know where you're at all the time.
Well, that's what I think, because like Timothy Collin, he had Dr. Roger Lear remove his implant. Now, his implant was a metallic type of implant. When it was sent out, when Dr. Lear sent it out to the lab to be analyzed, it came back as a silver type of compound, but it could not have been formed on our planet, because there was some other mixtures in it, and it was kind of really bizarre. But then you get in other ones like Whitney. He still has his implant. It kind of like when you go to remove it, it kind of moves on its own, like it doesn't want to be removed. But going back to Timothy Collin, after he had it removed, several months later, he was in pretty much the same area with him and his wife going to town. By a stop sign, he noticed a UFO again. And I said to him, have you ever gone back to see if you've been implanted again? And he goes, no. I haven't. I don't want to know.
Yes, I have something in my thumb, on my left thumb, and I had a doctor look at it, an orthopedic doctor, just because they were checking my fingers. I had trigger finger in one of my fingers, and he looked at it, felt of it. He said, "Does it bother you?" I said, "Yeah." When I rub up against it, it's just in an area where it doesn't get in the way of my thumb action. But I know there's something there. And he said, well, I don't really know what it could be, but he said, as long as it doesn't bother you, we're not going to do anything with it. I said, okay, fine. I didn't want to tell him that it's maybe an implant, because right away when you talk to academia about UFOs or implants, you're out of there. They just make a quick note and they say, yeah, okay, sure, fine. But you don't ever say that to academia. Daryl Sims told me that, and I have another. I think whenever they leave implants on you, it leaves some residual energy. And I've seen the residual energy in my car back in 2010 when I met this hybrid. I can go back through these stories, quite a few stories, if you want, Gary.
Well, we only got about 35 minutes. I do want you to touch base that alien that looked like a human that you made contact with. Why don't you explain a little bit about that to the listeners?
Okay. I was in Sedona. Well, actually, I ran across a medium in Springfield, Illinois, and this buddy of mine who writes ghost books, and he's into research in UFOs too. He told me to go to this gal. I said, okay, I'll go to her. And I said, I don't believe in psychics. I told her right away. She goes, well, and then she put her head down. She closed her eyes. She looked at me, and then she said, I got 4 things to tell you. And I said, what is it? She said, well, your back is not too good a shape. I said, well, I'll give you that. I probably walked in a little bit hunched over. And then she said, secondly, you're going to go out on a trip, aren't you? I said, yeah, how'd you know? She said, I was told by my medium, you're going on a trip. And she said, you're leaving in about, 9 days? I said, yeah. And then she says, well, your car is going to be damaged, but you'll be able to drive it back home. I said, really? She said, you'll be able to drive it. And she says, on October 4th, you're going to meet your first alien. And it was October 4th at 6:30 p.m. that I did meet my first alien in human form, Japanese young lady, maybe looked like she's in her early 30s. And she come up to me. I was at Cathedral Mound there in Sedona, Arizona. And I was taking films of it because people at the shop told me that there was a UFO scene there just the night before. So I had my video camera out and I was recording. And then right behind me pulls a little white car, and out jumps this Japanese young lady. She come up to me like a little puppy. And I was filming it, and I said, are you waiting for somebody? She goes, no. And she says, I said, are you going to take the hike? I said, looks like it's going to rain. It was kind of cool and rainy during those days, October 4th, at 6:30, and this year 2010. So I don't remember. I remember those things. You don't forget those things when they happen. So when they're really huge stories, they're not stories. They're events. Gary, I never like to call these things stories. Stories can be science fiction, or they can be, fiction, whatever. So,
well,
these are.
I like saying things that happen to you. How's that?
That's good. That's good. Experiences. But she told me, standing there, she said, we were supposed to meet. I looked at her and said, why were we supposed to meet? She didn't say anything. She just glared at me. She had real dark eyes, piercing, and it seemed like she started dumbing me down right from the start. And so it started raining. I said, oh, you want to get in the car and we can talk? She goes, sure. And she got in the car, and we sat there and we talked. And then up pulls another car, just a little parking space from me. And this guy had a headset on. He looked like he was in his late 20s. He had short cropped hair, and he looked like the CIA, NSA type. And I looked at him. He never looked at me one time. I kept looking over because it was kind of mysterious because we were the only 2 cars there. And it was about 7:30, and it was starting to get a little dark. And she kept looking at me like, don't do anything. I had a license to carry a gun. It was in my console. And I looked at the console, and I thought, there's something dangerous here. I'm in a trap. She looked at me like, don't worry about anything. Don't go for that gun in your console. She actually knew what was in that console, even without me even saying anything. And I told her, I said, I looked at her and I thought everything was okay. So she had me, I guess, dumbed down where I thought, well, don't go for a camera, don't go for anything. And then this guy pulled out, and then about 20 minutes later, he pulls back in. And then I really felt scared. I thought, what's going on? And then she shriveled down in the seat. Her eyes got bigger. And I was dumbed down to the point where it didn't alarm me that much. I think this, whatever they do to you, they can have control of you. I call it dumbing down. I think that's what they usually call it. Is that how you get it, Gary?
That's what I would, say, yes.
Yeah, so she shrunk down in the seat, and she almost looked like a little gray. And as I think about it, and as I thought about it that night and the next day, well, we ended up talking, and she was trying to elicit emotions from me. And she was strange. She said she knew 20 languages. She knew English, but she didn't know how to read it. And I found that really odd, that she knew 20 languages and didn't know how to read English. But I thought, okay, she kept asking these questions. What would you do with a coworker who didn't like you? I said, well, I'd try to talk it out, work it out. If that didn't work, then I'd just kind of leave a space there, between us. And then she started crying, a put-on cry. I put my hand on her hand. Her hand was burning hot. I mean, it was really hot. And I think it was Daryl Sims who told me I was talking to